In this video we're going to explore the geometry tracking features of PFTrack. Geometry tracking is the use of 3D geometry to extract camera and object motion without the need to do traditional 2D points that are tracked then solved into 3D point clouds. Geometry tracking can be used both for general tracking purposes and is very useful in cases where traditional tracking methods are quite difficult. For example, if you're trying to track something with lots of highlights or reflections where a 2D track will, generally speaking, pick up the reflections. And also for things like head and face replacement and digital set extensions where you can bring the geometry into the application and track the geometry into the footage rather than the other way around. To start with, I'm going to show you a very simple example where we're going to use a very simple object to track this shot. So you can see there's a little bit of free motion. What I'm going to do is go to the File menu and import tracking geometry and just import this box, which is just a very simple OBJ model of a box. So you can see as I move this around in the scene, it's actually changing relative to the camera position. What I need to do is actually align this with the geometry, and this is sort of a little bit tricky in this case, but what I can do is use the mouse keys here. The left mouse key will rotate, the right mouse key will translate, and the middle mouse key will actually scale. So I'm going to need to change the field of view of this a little bit because obviously it's not matching up at the moment, so let's just change that. I'll do this very roughly so you get the idea of how this works. Right, so we're starting to line this object up now with the geometry. Okay, so I'm just placing the cube on the corner now. Now you're going to use the tracking buttons here just to track this shot using this cube. It's a very simple piece of geometry. It doesn't need to be complex at all. You'll notice down here in the dope sheet we have a little blue marker which indicates a keyframe. We can position the object in several different frames to align it more accurately, and this will subsequently generate more keyframes which will then allow us to motion blend between them. So you can now see that the movement of the geometry actually matches the movement of the underlying footage. If I switch to a 3D view now, what you'll be able to see is the camera motion. If we just switch this around a little bit and zoom in, you can see now the camera motion has actually been calculated based just on this piece of geometry. If I zoom right in, you'll be able to see the camera path there shown as a white line. Okay, that's a very simple example of using geometry tracking. Something that's slightly more complex if we switch to this shot is using geometry for head or face replacement. So in this case I've actually created another motion group over here because what I'm interested in is actually tracking the object's motion, not the camera motion. So I've created a new motion group which I've called head, and if with this selected, if I go up to the camera parameters, you can see I've already set this to a stationary camera. So I'm going to repeat the process of importing tracking geometry, but this time what I'm going to do is import an OBJ model of the lion's head. You can see this has come in again as a very simple mesh, although in this case it's much more complex than the simple cube we used before. And again I'm going to very quickly align it using the mouse keys over the footage. In this case, because I know the lion's mouth's actually moving, what I want to do is lessen the influence of the area around the mouth here, and to do that we have a tool called weight painting. I've now activated the weight painting tool and you see we've got a translucent overlay over the actual geometry. By selecting the minus key here I can go in and start to paint over the geometry, and what this is doing is affecting the underlying vertex points and lessening their influence in the overall solution. So with that done, I'm now going to switch back to hidden line and again track this shot using the tracking tools. You'll see in this case we've actually got a box that's appeared around the object, and that indicates that it's actually tracking the object in this case and not the camera. So once this has got to the end, I can repeat the process and track backwards from our keyframe. Again, I can use multiple keyframes to position the geometry more accurately if necessary, but in this case I'm just doing it very quickly. So once this is solved, we can actually switch to the 3D view again, and let's just zoom in on these two windows. So you can see my piece of geometry there, and if I now play this back, you see we've now got a moving piece of geometry relative to the camera position.